Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my February wrap up. So wrapping up everything that I read and got up to in the month of February. I had a relatively successful month for reading in February, I would say. The month seemed to just fly by, that January went on for forever, that I did so much in January, and then February I feel as though obviously I did achieve things, but it just seemed to like disappear. As though I had one work trip, I guess worked, I ran, I don't even know. It just seemed to just disappear. I'm like looking back and I'm going, what did I do in February? I mean, obviously I did things, obviously I did, but it just seemed to disappear. So in terms of reading and books, I had a relatively successful month. Not as successful as January, but relatively successful considering that I had no holiday. Aside from that, I was taking a few Fridays off work as my annual leave runs like until the end of March and I have a few days to use. So I was starting to use some Fridays and that was really good because it was helping me out with my running. If you don't know, I'm training for the London Marathon. So running is taking over my life right now. Literally. So it was quite good having quite a few 3-day weekends to help me recover and do those runs without it taking over the whole weekend. In February, I read 6 books. I have started, and I'm a good way through a 7th book as well, which comes to 2,744 pages. Relatively successful, especially considering February only has 28 days in it. So that's just under 100 pages a day, which I feel like is pretty good. And that I've read 300 pages of a book that's not included in that. So it was a good time. And if February had had the normal like 31 days, I would have finished that 7th book. In terms of the genres, 5 of them were fantasy and 1 was fantasy romance, although a lot of them had some romantic elements in there. So I feel as though it can be a little bit hard to define nowadays what books are fantasy with a romantic subplot and what books are fantasy romance, because the lines just seem to be blurring. But if I'm thinking about fantasy romance in the fantasy romance sense, then there was just the one of those. 4 of the books were adult, 2 were YA, and then in terms of my star ratings, these were positive. They were relatively positive. There were some really high highs. So I had 1 5-star, 2 4.5 stars, which is quite positive, 1 4-star, and then I had 2 3-star disappointments. And then in terms of my series, I finished 2 series. I continued in 4 series, which puts my on the go at 29. One of my big things about February was series and how many series I could read just in a month. I think I started off and I read a couple and then I was like, we're just gonna make this a whole thing. So it is the month of series. I did not read any standalones. All I did was read series and sequels. So I didn't start anything. I just worked on my series. I finished things. I continued things. I got up to date in things. All I did was series. I don't really have like a fun vlog to go along with it. Like I know that is a concept that people do of finishing their series, but this is like the wrap up of I really worked on my series this month. I mean, there is still progress that needs to be done because I'm still on 29, but I'm back into the 20s, which is positive after having a bit of an escapade in January and starting loads of things. I've curtailed myself, got myself back down, and we did a lot of work. A big positive there. So everything that we're going to be talking about is series. So we'll start off with the one that I'd started in January and then continued on into February, and that is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. One that a lot of people will have read by now. It is the 3rd book in the 4th Wing series, which is very, very hyped. It is very well known. It is something that a lot of people, I guess, have spoken about. It is a fantasy romance series. We're following the main character, Violet, and she, in the 1st book, enters into this dragon training academy. She has trained all her life to become a scribe, but in the last minute, her mum says, absolutely not. You have to go into the Dragon Academy, which is a very life or death situation as people are training to start to ride dragons. I have quite mixed feelings about this one. I think it was too long. People were even talking about this book at work, and I was just like, people that I don't associate with as being readers. Everyone was reading this. Everyone's read I mean, they say it's like the biggest selling fantasy book in 20 years or something. Like, I mean, that's great. It's great that it's getting so many people into reading, but I just think there's better, and that's what frustrates me. And I did enjoy the first book. Like, I do think it's relatively enjoyable, but this one, it was quite a drag. They do a lot of journeying, but I'm going, what is the point in any of this journeying? Like, what is the point in this? I feel as though there were so many directions that this could have gone in, and it would have been better. Like, I would have preferred for the story to have gone in so many different directions, and what it did was just boring. I was like, why are we going down this boring route? That there were elements there were parts of it that I enjoyed. I'm actually thinking back on this, I'm going, it's all sort of blurring already, that I'm forgetting things already in this. I just feel as though the first book had so many fun elements to it, and now this series doesn't quite know what it wants to be, because it's sort of going down this serious war route, but also trying to maintain the fun fantasy romance elements. It's sort of got a bit of an identity. It's got an identity crisis, because it's not doing the fun things that it did in Fourth Wing, but it's also not diving into like the dark, gritty fantasy elements enough for me to enjoy it. It's just sort of plodding along. It's not badly written. I feel as though some of the characters blur, that I don't quite know who they all are nowadays now. Like, they haven't got enough defining characteristics for me to go, oh yes, that's that person, and oh yes, that's that person. I just sort of go, all side characters blur. And the romance is just getting boring. This is my thing that fantasy romance series. This is going to be 5 books, but your characters have got together in book 1. How are you meant to maintain that angst and drama? Like, you're just not. So it just gets boring. Anyway, there's my rant over. I don't know if I'll read the 4th book when it comes out. I'm sure I probably will, because I'll get swept along by the hype, but I wasn't a massive fan of this. And sticking with the disappointments, just to get them out of the way, just get them done, and then we can move on to positive things and end on a high. I also had some rather mixed emotions about Cursebound by Zara El-Arifi. So I've read and enjoyed, particularly the Ending Fire series by Zara El-Arifi. Like, I really enjoyed that one, and there are elements in this, like, I do enjoy her as a writer, but this series just isn't quite hitting in the same way. This one is the sequel to Feybound, which I read last year, and Feybound as well I had some mixed emotions with. I had some issues, because I think Zara El-Arifi does a really good job with world building, and with politics and developing a world and having a really interesting, like, magic system world thing. Same in the Ending Fire, same in this. In this one, it's that we have 3 peoples, the humans, fae, and elves. The humans and fae have been extinct for hundreds of years, and the elves have been at war with each other over the resources of the world. And at the beginning of the book, we are following these 2 sisters that have been exiled from the elven lands, and they stumble across the fae and realise that they're not actually extinct and that they are there. And there's a lot of, like, interesting magic and lore that surrounds these 3 peoples, saying that there's never going to be any progress within this world until all 3 can thrive. That the fae are forever going to be trapped in the underground caverns of where they are, that the elves are always going to be constantly at war, and the humans, who knows where the humans are. So I do think there's a lot of, like, really interesting lore in this, and politics, and I think she has some interesting twists and turns that go through the first couple of books. But I think that these couple of releases have been rushed. I mean, I can't speak to the publishing, like, schedule. I don't know. I'm not there. I'm not in the room. But it just feels as though they are a little bit rushed. She's great at the ideas, but the execution is not quite delivering to the standards, at least, of the final strife. That I think she just needs more time, and maybe she's just not getting it. I don't know. But this felt quite juvenile in the way that it was written. It was fast-paced. Like, I read it really quickly. Like, it was definitely engaging to read, which is a positive in and of itself, that it was a very engaging, fast-paced read. However, it felt as though it was missing details, that it had the bones of the story. It probably even had the muscles. It was just missing, like, the skin. I don't know. Like, everything was there. It just needed fleshing out more. Like, this is an instance where this book is quite short. It's just over 300 pages. It could have had another 100 pages of actually being sort of fleshed out. I said it back with the first book as well. I think that the romantic elements are not her strong suit. That in the final strife, they were more of a subplot, whereas in this, they're more of a focus, and they are just not her strength. In my opinion, I'd be perfectly happy reading a book by her that does not include any romance. Whereas this has romance as quite a big part of the plotting, and it doesn't really add anything for me. I probably will finish this series because I think it is just a trilogy, and I am definitely interested in seeing how it's all going to wrap up. But I am a little bit frustrated with it. We will now move into some sequels and finales that were not frustrating, that stuck the landing, that did not give me grievances. Firstly, just so I don't forget them, I have been continuing my Throne of Glass audiobook journey. As I am training for the London Marathon, I have dedicated my audiobook listening hours to Throne of Glass and rereading the series that I read 10 years ago. I think it was 10 years ago, 2016, when I was looking at my Goodreads, it said 2014 original read, 2016. I don't know how many times I've read some of these books, but I've read them quite a few times. In February, I read 2 more instalments in the series. So I read The Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel novellas which come before the start of the very series. And it's made up of 5, I believe, novellas, but they all sort of flow on from each other. And they do give a good grounding in our main character and where she comes from. And then I have just finished Heir of Fire. I literally had... I was about to say a marathon. I did not have a marathon yesterday, but I had a marathon amount of reading whilst I did 2/3 of a marathon. I had a god-awful run that just never ended and absolutely has destroyed my body of 27 kilometres, which is a very, very long way. It's not a marathon, but it's a very, very long way. And during that time, I listened to a lot of Heir of Fire. I did not think I was finishing Heir of Fire yesterday. I thought I was going to be going into this having 2 books unfinished, but that run went on for forever and a day. And I did come home with about an hour and a quarter left of Heir of Fire and just went, I'm going to finish this. So I binged the second half of Heir of Fire. I have read those 2 this month. I am thoroughly enjoying my time in this world. It is so good to be back at peak at Sarah J Maas. This is Sarah J Maas at her best. And I feel as though I'm going to be getting into the best of the best. But rereading Heir of Fire and just remembering these moments, and it's been a good few years. I had forgotten quite a few bits of Heir of Fire. I feel as though the first 2 books were fresher in my memory than Heir of Fire. I knew the plot beats, but I'd forgotten quite a few bits and pieces, I'd say. And I think I'm going into the second half with bits and pieces forgotten, that I actually know the first half of the series better than the second half of Throne of Glass. So it was just amazing. It was so good to be back. So good to be back in this world. I had such a great time with this read, and would strongly recommend a Throne of Glass reread. If you've not read it and you enjoy fantasy romance, then you should read the original. You should read Throne of Glass, which is why I'm also feeling a bit conflicted on my categorization, because Throne of Glass is classed as YA, but I don't feel like Throne of Glass is any more YA than Feybound, than Cursebound. Cursebound read just as YA as Throne of Glass series. So I'm where is that line? Where is that line? And they both have romantic elements to them. Where's that line between something being a fantasy and something being a fantasy romance now? Who knows? I then had 2 series finales, which both of them stuck the landing. Praise be that they stuck the landing, because it is always so disappointing when you get to the end of a series and it does not stick the landing. Whereas these were some of my favourite series, and they managed to stick the landing. I read the finale of the 5 Penalties series by Marina Losetta, this being The Teeth of Dawn. I keep forgetting this title, but The Teeth of Dawn. I do have some gripe about this book. It's a paperback, not a hardback, but that's not the book's fault. It's Tor, the publisher's fault, for not releasing this in hardback. Anyway, the 5 Penalties series is a series that I started last year, absolutely adored, and this one was just as good. So the first book is called The Hell of Midnight. I've spoken about it a few times. We're set in this world where when you die, you can imbue your sort of memories and psyche into these helmets, and then other people can wear them and gain your knowledge. So if you were a doctor, somebody can put that on, and then they've gained all of your medical knowledge. And at the beginning of the first book, one of the sort of very well protected helmets gets stolen, which is the helmet of a serial killer. So it was kept under guard. And then these murders start happening in the same style of this serial killer. And we're following our main character, Krona, who was there at the scene of the crime. She is in the police force as she tries to investigate and find this helmet before many more murders occur. And then we are following multiple timelines as well with other perspectives. And then in the sequel, everything sort of expands and goes from there. You learn a lot more about the magic system and about the world. And I think Marina Lostetta has done a really good job with incorporating different perspectives as she expands the world and expands our knowledge of the magic system, which is what she did in the second book, which is what I wanted. And then she does it again here as we just grow to understand what is going on. I think this series is so underhyped. Like, it deserves for more people to read it because it is so good. Like, I think this should appeal to a lot of people. It is so well written. Like, I was like, I trust you. I feel as though these books are so well crafted, so well plotted, so well thought out. It has such a great way of mixing together fantasy elements with other elements. There are some parts that are quite horrifying. There is this mystery as well, especially in this first book, as we try and figure everything out about who's getting murdered, why they're getting murdered, trying to piece that together. There's sort of sci-fi elements to it. Like, the way this blends different genres together is so fun and engaging. There's romantic subplots that go through it. I just think the way that everything is crafted and put together is done so well. I do want to do a series review of this. That was something I was thinking of filming, some series reviews next weekend. Yes, I would strongly recommend this series. This book definitely stuck the landing for me. I did find it took me a little while to read, that it was quite long, but I think that was me and not the book. It was the book in that these pages are quite big and the text is quite small. That is just what it is. That it does take quite a while to read each page in this. I had such a good time with this. I had such a good time, even though it took me ages, even though it took me a lot of the month. I would strongly recommend this series, and I think you should all read it. And then the other finale that I read is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett. Once again, a big success. I have loved the Emily Wilde series. I do have a review up of the first book, so I can link that. And this is another one where I'm thinking of doing a series review. I just haven't got around to filming it yet. And this is, the third book in this series. It is on the cozier side of things. It is cozy, but it's not like cozy fantasy. Although it is cozy fantasy. Because I don't feel as though I am a cozy fantasy reader, but I do love this. So that probably does not make any sense. Emily Wilde, the first book, we're following our main character, Emily, and she is a researcher on the topic of fairies. It's sort of set Victorian era, and in the first book she goes off to this remote Nordic island to investigate the fairies there as she is writing a encyclopedia of them. It is her area of expertise, and she is followed by her academic rival Wendell Bambleby, and things ensue. So some sort of romance, there's these interesting investigations into the fairies on this island, and adventure and everything from there. Emily is a little bit, I'd say, not unlikable, but I think she's shy. She doesn't know how to interact with people all the time. She's just very invested in her encyclopedia, in her research, and I just enjoy reading about that as a character. And the second book continued on in the same vein, and this third one as well, that it really focuses on those fairy tale elements and fairies that are good or bad, and exploring all of that. I enjoy Emily as our main character. I think she is, if you don't like and connect with Emily, then I think you probably would struggle with this series, because if you don't like her, it's going to be hard being in her head the whole time. And if you don't enjoy the fairy tale elements as well, probably not for you. But if you have enjoyed the first two books, then I think you would enjoy this third book. It continues on in exactly the same vein. I don't think it's my favourite in the series. That might still be the first book, just because that book has, it has a special place in my heart. I read it during quite a tough time, and I managed to be completely engulfed in that story. That it completely took me out of where I was, and was such a joy to read. So this series definitely has a special place in my heart, and I would strongly recommend it if you're after something very light, fun, enjoyable, fairy tale-esque. That is everything that I finished in the month of February. I have also started and made some really good headway with The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon, the second book in the Bone Season series, which I am thoroughly enjoying. Thoroughly enjoying. Like, there are some highs here. There are some real highs of like absolute standout books this month, because this is going to be joining the highs. There were those couple of disappointments, but definitely a lot of highlights. The Bone Season, I read it in January, or reread it, because I did read these books 10 years ago at the end of 2014, and I'm following a main character, Paige Mahoney, who is a clairvoyant. So in this world, people can develop magic, and traditionally this is relating around like spirits or being able to predict the future. Paige herself is able to dreamwalk, sort of be able to spot other magical people and potentially get into their heads. And anyone who has magic is criminalised. Oh. She is part of the criminal underworld, and at the beginning of the first book she gets arrested and sort of thrown into Oxford. And things go from there. It's got a really interesting magic system and politics at play. I'm really enjoying our characters. I'm enjoying the slightly different setting that we have here. Loving this. I will speak about it more in my March wrap up, because it will be finished in March, but I'm loving my reread of the series, so would recommend. Anyway, that is everything that I've managed to read in the month of February. Let me know how your reading has been going this past month, if you've read any of these, or if any of them are in your plans, TBR. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!